Guys, back here at Shapiro Capital flagship office and podcast, and we are talking about Dodd-Frank. That's Dodd-Frank. I don't even know what I just said. What I want to tell you may not be liked by a lot of you guys, okay? And you guys know I'm a super big supporter of Donald Trump, and I like red states, and I'm a freaking Republican. But the one great thing that President Barack Obama did was rescue the banks. And by rescuing the banks, we still have an assemblage of a banking industry. It might have been so different today if he didn't do that. And that single-handedly is probably the greatest act of being a president. The second greatest act of what he did is he passed what's called the Jobs Act, and we will talk about that in the future. But I want you to understand there was the Dodd-Frank Act, okay? And that was Chris Dodd, a senator from Connecticut, and Barry Frank, a senator from Massachusetts. And they came up and they were tasked with looking at the banks and finding out why the banks failed, why the banks were allowed to lend so much money based on cash assets that really were not cash assets. And I don't want to go into all the machinations of how banks operate, but I will just tell you that when a bank buys either a VDO, a CDO, mortgage-backed securities, and they keep it on their portfolio, and they buy it from a broker-dealer who slices it up and sells it in different pieces, those are called tranches, they rate it, and they have a return. A bank could put it on their books as cash and cash equivalent. But when the mortgage industry started to fail and they started to repackage all these and create more hypothecated securities, they were just straight mierda, which in Spanish is shit, and put it on the books of the banks. And then when the banks needed capital, nobody would buy them. If you want to understand more about this, you could actually watch a movie called Margin Call. Great freaking movie. Brad freaking Pitt. Love the guy. All right? Great cast. And it'll give you a little insight on what went on. And it still goes on today. But Barry Frank and Chris Dodd were tasked with looking at how the banks operate and finding out why the banks failed and how to make that change. So when they passed Dodd-Frank in 2010, for the next 2 years, a bank could not foreclose on someone's home. They could not displace them. So you had a lot of play going on. You had a lot of people that were buying pools of mortgages. They were negotiating with the people who lived there, and people made a fortune. And the single-family rental market came out of this from the great financial crisis of 2008. But what really happened is the guys, the two senators, Chris and Barry, figured out that the way banks operate and the way they used to take their net capital from these bad and toxic assets, that they had to do something a little different. And they did this, and they opened up the banking laws, because prior there was a terminology, it was called mark to market. So it's mark to market. And that meant any mortgage on the bank's books that was non-performing, which means it's not paying for 60 days, that had to be booked as a non-performing asset. What happens to a bank balance sheet when that happens? They have what's called a net capital reserve, and that net capital reserve goes down. And when it goes down, they can't lend as much. So what they did is they were playing around, obviously, and that's why we came to this financial crisis. And even AIG, one of the biggest insurance companies, came this close to failing. I believe they borrowed $280 million or $280 billion. I don't know what the number was. I forgot. Maybe Tanner could look it up. I believe it's $280 billion. Okay? How much did AIG borrow from the federal government as a bailout? Everybody got bailed out. Every big bank, every investment firm, they all got bailed out. They let Lehman Brothers fail. They let What's the other firm that was on Park Avenue? I used to do business with them. They were huge. Approximately 182 billion. Look up who were the carnage in big broker dealers that failed. I'm forgetting their name. Big broker dealers that failed during the financial crisis. Lehman and I always forget their name. They were huge. They were on Park Avenue. They were bigger than Lehman. Lehman was super aggressive. Lehman would lend on anything. They would do equity on anything. They were beasts. Okay? Guys, it was Bear Stearns. They were the best. I used to go there and get financing all the time. They were super aggressive. After that, Merrill. So guys, all right, I want you to understand that today, there is $3 trillion of toxic debt on all the bank's books. So guess what? Does history repeat itself? Fucking yeah. So get ready. Let's learn about multifamily. Let's learn how to level up and let's go.